Hey there, I'm Sean Fleming, a wildlife photographer based in San Francisco, and today I'm going to be walking you through my full culling, sorting, and editing process for wildlife photography. And if you've ever shot wildlife before, you know you can come home with tons of images and not know what to do with them. It can be a little bit overwhelming. Now, this is not a full tutorial of how to use Lightroom or Capture One, so I will assume you have some basic knowledge of the programs, and everything I say in this video is pretty universal, so it should work for any editing program that you use. So I'll be walking you through my process from importing to posting to social media. Alright, so today I'm going to be going through some images of burrowing owls. And if you're interested in learning more about these, I actually recently just did a video on these exact burrowing owls, so a link down below if you're interested. And in this tutorial, I'll be using Capture One, but everything that I say here will be also applicable to Lightroom. The editing capabilities in here and Lightroom are 99% the same for the stuff that I do. But before I even get into editing, it's time to sort and cull through these photos. So especially with a 61 megapixel camera like I use, I like to save some memory space, especially with how expensive SSDs are these days. So before I even edit anything or pick out my selects, I go through and I give everything a good look for sharpness. Now that 61 megapixel sensor I mentioned is also very unforgiving with sharpness. If there's just a tiny bit of motion blur, you will see it in your picture. So I like to zoom all the way in to 100% or somewhere close to that, so I can really assess the quality of the images. And what I do here is I give them a 1 if they are sharp, and I give them no rating if they are not as sharp. So you can see even between these two, like this is a sharp enough image, but you can see the feathers down here are sharp. There's maybe some motion blur or something happening up here. It's just not quite as sharp, and they're kind of the same image anyway. So I'm going to skip that one. I'm going to continue through and give 1, 0, 1, 1, and I'm going to go ahead and sort through the rest of these images. Alright, and that's the end of step 1. It took me a little less than 10 minutes, but your mileage may vary, to go through 350 images. So you can see maybe 1,000 images might take me up to 30 minutes to go through on the longer end. But I think the process is totally worth it for all the storage space that I'm going to save. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to sort these images by 1 star or higher. So I have all my selects. These are the images that I thought were sharp or worth keeping. And I've gone down from 354 to 164. I tend to usually cut out about half of my images, sometimes even more. And with my raw files that are over 100 megabytes a piece, that is a lot of memory saving. Because what I'm actually going to do at the end of this process is after I've edited all my images and exported them, I'm going to delete all of the raws that I gave 0 stars to. Now, of course, it's up to you whether you keep or delete raw files. When I had a 24 megapixel camera, storage was not so much of an issue. It was also much cheaper back then. So up to you, but I tend to just delete all the blurry images, just to keep my library a little cleaner and my storage space cleaner. So now that we're done with pass 1, I'm going to go through pass 2. And this pass is about what is actually a good image or not. So I'm going to be looking at my composition, lighting, all of that stuff, and seeing like this is a good image, this is a not so good image. And usually I don't highlight a ton of them as keepers. I tend to be really selective. So you might have 300 something images and then come away with maybe 5 that are really good and worth posting. So what I do here, again, I just hit my 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 keys and I rate the images accordingly. So I'm going to go through here and see if anything stands out to me now that I can see the full picture. And just a quick reminder to like and subscribe if you're enjoying the video so far. All right, I've gone through and rated the images that I liked. I think I was a little especially harsh here because I have gone for several photo shoots for these owls. So I'm really only picking the best keepers out of the keepers. So what I'm going to do here now is I'm going to go and sort my images by 2 stars or higher. So only my special images are going to come up here. So these are the selects that I took out here. I got my pictures of the owls, and I also have a couple pictures of this western meadowlark. I had to put this image into Google and find out what it was, but I thought it was really funny. It was kind of hopping around while I was seeing pictures of the owls and decided to snap a couple pictures of that too. I think this is my favorite image, is the ones here with that scowl on one foot with the talons out. I thought that was pretty cool. And then the classic stare down here. So now I have my favorites. I'm gonna actually start the editing process. All right, so on to the exciting part, the editing. So I've gone through a lot of editing processes through presets, through manual, and I've had some mixed success with both. I'd say that presets that I've, gotten from the internet or purchased have had kind of mixed results, kind of depends on the photo. I've made my own presets, had pretty good results with those, but after a while, I have kind of just come back to manually editing all the photos. And it's not every single photo, so I will take whatever I did for edits on this photo and put it on this photo or any other near photos. Maybe it would work on this one, this kind of similar lighting. But I've just found over time that presets are good for getting a starting point, but I've kind of honed my editing style down, and I like to keep things pretty natural. So I just prefer to do manual editing, even if it takes a little bit more time. So for this image, the first thing that I usually start out with is white balance. So just looking at this as a whole, I think this is a little bit cool. And I also tend to put my images a little bit on the warmer side anyway. So I'm gonna get close, and it's probably a little too warm. It's too cold. I like to go somewhere in the middle, a little on the warmer side, maybe like that. And the next thing that I do on most images is dehaze. This is in Capture One and Lightroom, but I kind of think of this as what you wish the contrast slider would do. You can obviously go overboard with it, but I think it just gives your image a little bit more detail, especially if your image is legitimately hazy. It can get rid of some of that haze, like I can make mine hazy here. But I like to maybe put it a little bit further than I would go, dial it back down until it looks about right. So that just kind of gave the shadows a bit more emphasis, add a little bit more contrast into the image. But one thing that I found that slider does do is reduce the exposure a little bit. So I'm going to compensate for that by boosting my exposure, and then maybe I'll play with this a little bit more, kind of go back and forth until I find that good balance. That is looking pretty good. I'll also usually want to play around with the shadows and blacks on their own. So I kind of like how the blacks were behaving there more than the shadows. You can see the shadows were really bringing down maybe some areas of the owl I don't want to. The blacks are really just bringing down only the darkest areas of the image. Now, I don't go too extreme with my edits usually. You could do something like this and really make it stand out, or bump your shadows all the way up and deal with all that noise. I usually try to get some kind of middle ground here, so I do want it to stand out a little bit more. That looks about good to me. Then I'll go in with some highlights. So I think maybe the white feathers could use a little bit of a boost. Let's play around with the whites here. I think maybe I'll put those down a little bit because there's some feathers over here that are looking a little overexposed at that exposure. All right. I don't usually mess around with contrast or brightness too much. Saturation, I will usually mess around with a little bit, just give it a little touch, maybe somewhere in that like 0 to 10 range. I don't like to go crazy with it again. And that's looking pretty good as a base image. So you can see if we reset here, that's what we started with, and there's where we are now. So the next thing that I'll do is go into the color editor, and you can do this through curves, you can do it through this tool, you can do it through color balance, you can do it however you want. But basically what I'm looking for is if I see any kind of abnormalities or things that I want to fix or adjust, or maybe stylistically adjust in the photo, I will do that now that I've got kind of my base edit. So looking at this, I'm seeing maybe a little bit of blue greens in the shadows throughout here. And I find that in the shade that tends to happen, especially if there's like a contrast between something light and dark. The blues and greens can get a little weird. So I'm just gonna play around with those a little bit. I'll check out the cyan and see how the tools are affecting them. So that seems to be targeting definitely part of those. So you can see as I slide it around, that's getting adjusted. The greens a little bit in different places. So it looks like green and cyan. And let's check out blue. Blue is a little bit more subtle. In the back, it's definitely more noticeable. All right, so these blue, green, cyan areas here is what I'm gonna focus on. So, I mean, looking at the image, these are rocks, so I don't want them to be super blue. So the first thing I'm gonna do is probably take down the saturation here, and then maybe I'll mess with the hue a little bit. So it looks like, again, I don't wanna usually go too extreme on one side. So let's try out that. And now let's try to tackle some of those greens. I want to be careful if there was grass or something in my image that I'm not knocking that out, but there's not really here. There's a touch of foliage, so I'll probably crop out anyway. And then let's take a look at these blues. I don't want those to be super prominent. I also don't want them to be purple. Maybe let's bring those a little bit towards cyan. Let's darken them up a little bit. Maybe let's darken up the cyan a little bit more, desaturate a little more. That's looking pretty good. I like to do that reset again. So you can see I took out some of that kind of blue cast that was going on, and a little bit on the bird as well. And I think I like the results from that. So what you saw me do there is really up to the individual image itself. That's why I don't like presets as much, because there might not be blue rocks in your next image and you might be desaturating the sky or something that you don't want to do. So I tend to take it image by image, since I am super selective when I go through. Like, I just went from 350 to 9 images that I like here. I think it's worth the time investment and I have fun with it. So let's look at our other colors. So now I'm going to focus on the subject, which is our owl here. And the main color here obviously is orange. So I'm going to just make sure that I'm affecting that. And yes, I certainly am. I probably don't want to mess with the hue too much. I don't want like a green or red owl. That just looks a little bit weird. Yeah, I think I'll maybe bump that a touch this way, just to get rid of some of that green. Play around with saturation. Could have a completely black and white owl. Interesting. What's lightness looking like? Oh, I kind of like how it gives a little contrast. Let me just put down the lightness a little bit and then bump the saturation to make up for it. I think that's looking pretty good. And again, let's reset, see that looks like. And I think I do like the changes that I made there. So this is looking pretty good for now. What I'm gonna go into now is some like local editing. I don't know if that's the official word for it, but basically brushes and the sort, editing to specific areas of the photo. And what I want to do here is look at the eyes. Now I don't want to do anything extreme here, but I'm gonna take my brush and I'm just gonna draw a mask around these eyes. Keep the brush nice and soft. You can see my tool here. I've selected the eyes and you can see how that affects it. And now I'm gonna play around with the yellow in the eyes. So I didn't want to play around with the yellow across the entire image because the feathers and stuff might start looking weird, but here I wanna maybe make that yellow just pop a little bit more. So again, I'm seeing a little bit of green in these eyes that maybe doesn't represent what I saw in person. So I think I am gonna put that a little bit towards the orange side. Might raise the lightness a little bit. Saturation, you wanna be careful. You don't want like an alien looking owl, but maybe boost that a little bit. And then let's zoom out and take a look at how that looks. Again, I don't want anything super extreme, but you can see some of that green went away. It's nice and yellow and bright. You obviously don't want like your owl looking crazy and out of control. So try to be gentle with these controls. Don't abuse them or your images will end up looking very fake. I try to kind of recreate what I remember seeing in person and kind of enhance the image rather than making something up. This is cool. You can actually see the sunset in the owl's eyes, which is pretty cool. I've gotten some shots where you can actually see the outline of myself in their eyes. And I think I'm overall happy with this. I think one of the things that I struggle the most in my edits is exposure. I tend to lean on the side of underexposure maybe a little bit. But now that I have this image, I'm going to copy and paste these changes to this image. I'm going to have to adjust my mask because its eyes are not up here in this photo. I'm just going to move them down here. There we go. It's looking pretty good. So now between these photos, since they were captured right after each other, I can just copy and paste the edits in between those two and they'll both look good. So I'll go through a few more images here. And then what I actually like to do, a really important step that I'll get back to at the end here, is take a break, let your eyes reset, and then come back to your images again. I may actually come back to this image and be like, oh my gosh, what was I thinking when I was doing this edit? I want to make all these changes. It doesn't usually happen too dramatically, but sometimes you might come back and say, oh, this is way underexposed, but your eyes kind of get used to it when you're staring at a picture for a while. So it's good to go through, do some other images, take a break, and then come back and look at what you have and maybe make some final edits. All right, this image is pretty similar lighting to this, so I'm just gonna copy my edits over to this picture and see what we get. It's maybe not perfect, but I think it does look a little bit better. I can tell the white balance is maybe off. Definitely want to get rid of my mask that I had there, but let's see if I can make this edit work. And after a couple adjustments, I think this is doing pretty good. I adjusted the white balance and I also brought down the highlights a little bit because I think they were a little extreme. Maybe I'll bring down the whites as well. But I think this got us to a pretty good starting point. A lot of the edits that I make, like the dehaze, messing around with black shadows and stuff, can translate between relatively similar images. So on this image, it looks pretty good. But if I were to copy those changes to maybe an image like this, it's gonna look completely different from what I want. This bird has yellow on it. There's all kinds of green grass that I just messed with in it. That edit is not gonna work for this kind of image. So in similar lighting, I think it works, but that's, again, why presets are not just a one and done. They're a good starting point. So I was able to use this preset here as a starting point for this image. That's pretty good. I'm already looking back at this image and I am seeing things that I want to edit, but I will leave that for now. Okay, so I'll just take you through a few more images here just so you can see how my mind works as I'm going through these. I'm actually going to add a little bit of a vignette, I think, maybe to this image when I'm done with it. Yeah, I think that'll look good. Now, I don't actually usually put vignettes on my photo in my editing program. I'll usually do that in Instagram or wherever I'm posting because this is probably not the final crop that I'll go with. So I don't want to have a cropped vignette that I slap another vignette on top of. But I think this is a pretty good candidate for that. Before I post, I think I will put a vignette just to emphasize the subject a little bit more. Again, I'll do those same local edits and Capture One actually stores them for me. So I could just put them back on this image too. And then my exposure is looking maybe a little bit low on this picture still. I think I could maybe tweak my shadows down a little bit more here. I like that separation. This one has a lot brighter of a background, so that separation between the subject and the background I think is a little bit more important here. And speaking of, I'm actually going to try to separate this subject even a little bit more. So what I'm actually going to do is add another adjustment layer here, and I'm going to select the owl. All right, so that took me a little bit, but I was able to select the subject. That is one thing that I'm jealous of Lightroom for, is they have really good AI-based subject detection and selection and all that. But this is good enough for demonstration purposes here. I've got my subject selected here. And now what I'm going to do is invert this mask so I have the background selected. Now I'm going to play around with the background a little bit. Again, I don't want to go extreme on any of this, but what I want to do here is just take down that background just a little bit to emphasize the owl. And I might even mess around with some of the attributes of that, like the highlights. Maybe, I think those are still pretty good. And you can see here, it's not super dramatic. I don't want people to be able to tell that I did a kind of edit like this. But in a busier background photo like this, just selecting your background and lowering down the exposure a little bit can help make your subject pop out just that little bit more. Maybe that's a little bit too much even, but something like this. And again, I'll come back to this and maybe you'll think this is crazy in the future, but I think this is looking pretty good and gives me more of that separation effect that I'm looking for. I'm able to adjust the darkness of the background without adjusting like the shadows of the bird itself, and just make it stand out just a little bit more. All right, and I won't take you through every single image in here, but I want to show you a few unique scenarios so you can get a sense for what I usually do. Now this photo I wanted to show you because this is some pretty extreme lighting. We have some really dark and blue going on the right side of the owl in the shadow, and then we have some nice sunset lighting on the left side, and the differences are pretty extreme between the two. So I want to even this out a little bit more, get rid of some of the extreme highlights and shadows, warm up some of those blue tones, and hopefully get some more even lighting on this bird. So the first thing I'm going to try to adjust here is the shadows. So I'm not going to pay too much attention to the background in here. I'm just looking at the owl itself because I can always, like I showed you, calm down that background later. Let's bring up the shadows in that bird a little bit. Maybe so it's not washed out, I'll bring down the blacks in turn. Then let's bring down some of the whites so that those feathers don't pop out so much on the left. I think that's looking pretty good. Let's mess with overall white balance. Let's see, on the right side of the photo, you see it'll take a lot more work than the left one, where the left will get like overly warm. So I'm going to balance for the left side here. That looks about right to me. I think I'm actually just going to leave it as shot. So now that I have the shadows boosted a little bit, again, I'm going to go in with some local adjustments. So I'm going to take my brush here and I'm going to take a nice feathered brush and just give a paint down the side of this owl that's in the shade. And let's start making some adjustments there. So now I can look at the white balance on just that side, and that is looking a lot better already. Just warming up. Again, I don't want to go too far, but just warming up that right side of the owl a little bit, is making it look a little bit more natural. Let's take out some of the green that's showing up there, and then desaturate the purple I just put into it. That is looking a lot better to me. The other one looks really blue. So now let's look at these oranges here. Do I want to mess with these at all? Not really. It's giving me a strange effect just in the middle part of the bird here. And I might actually just go in and adjust so that this part in the middle is not included, because that part is actually nice and warm and it's looking a little weird. Let's mess around some more with shadows here. I don't want to like completely even it out. I want there to be some sense of lighting here, but I think that's looking about good. Then again, let's mess with the individual colors. I'm still seeing some blue here that maybe I just want to calm down a little bit more. Yeah, that made a little bit of a difference. Let's check out cyan. That's not really doing anything. And what's green doing? Also not doing a ton. I think this is looking pretty good. You can see the before and after. Really made a difference in just evening out the lighting on this bird here. Now I can go back in, and you want to be careful now when you do adjustments that they won't be applied to this layer that's sitting on top. So if I decide, oh, I want to make this image cool now, I can see that adjustment layer on top as clear as day. So that's why I like to get a base, good enough edit down first, and then worry about the rest of it. So maybe I'll take down these highlights a little bit more, boost the exposure, not that much. Be like that. And now I can mess with my shadows and stuff even maybe a little bit more. So let's worry about the background. I will boost these shadows up on the local adjustment layer. And I think that exposure looks pretty good. Now I'm probably going to go for a vertical crop on this image, so I'm not going to worry a ton about stuff over there. In fact, I might just temporarily crop it for now so I can see what I'm looking with. I tend to do 4x5s for verticals. Let's just do a rough crop and continue the edit from there. Let's look at all these greens around. Let's see what we can do with those. We warm them up a little bit. I want them darker, lighter, probably not so saturated. Make those a little darker. Let's look at the blues in the background. Maybe make those a little less prominent, maybe even a little darker to make the owl's head stand out more. You can see that makes pretty good difference, but I don't want to go crazy because it will affect the owl itself. Maybe the cyan I can take down a little bit to get rid of some of this stuff on the left. Maybe shift that around. No, I'll keep it as it is. And I think that's looking pretty good if you look at our original photo versus this one. I think that's pretty good. Now I will uncrop this image because I actually don't tend to crop my images in Capture One. I will wait until I get them onto my phone before I'm about to post, before I crop them. I want to have those full images in my library, so if I decide to maybe post a horizontal or a vertical, I have those JPEGs of the entire image and I can just make that decision and duplicate it in my iPhone library as whatever I want to do with it. I just leave the image as it is, as it's composed, and then crop it later. So one last adjustment here, just a little bit more exposure, bring down those highlights. And I think that is looking pretty good. All right, so I took a little break. I reset my eyes, and now I am back to the photos to make some final adjustments in Capture One. So looking back at the first photos here, I am still seeing a little bit of this green cast going on. So I'm gonna try to fix this maybe with the full white balance adjustment. So now we're doing a ton. Let's mess around with the greens in here. Just put that saturation even more down. Put our blues a little more blue. Yeah, I think that's looking pretty good. So I'll copy those adjustments onto this one. Again, I'll get rid of whatever adjustment layer is not its actual eyeballs. This one. And I think those two are looking pretty good now. Let's go back to this one. I think this one's pretty solid. Maybe a little bit more exposure. That highlight is maybe a little too extreme. I think this is looking pretty good. So I think I'm happy with this. There's maybe a touch of purple in there that I don't want. Maybe the oranges could be a little more saturated. Actually, let's just take up the saturation of the whole picture a little bit. Yeah, I think I'm happy with that. And this last one, I'm seeing a lot of this green kind of carry through on the bird, so I'm gonna, again, try to adjust my white balance here. Just bring in some of the purple. And I find that with the tint, it's a little tough. Sometimes you get rid of the green and then it just instantly looks purple and there's no real good in between. So what I tend to do is make it so the greens go away and then just bring back down the purples afterwards. So it kind of neutralized out those greens, and then I got rid of the purple that added. Maybe not so much. I think that looks good. In terms of warmth, I think it's pretty good. Maybe bump the exposure just a little bit. And again, I think I'm mostly happy with this. In the real world, I might spend a little bit more time, but just for demonstration purposes, I think I'm pretty happy with these edits, at least on the computer. So I'm going to export these images, and then the next step is I typically post on Instagram, which people view from their phones. So I actually like to do my final adjustments and cropping from my phone screen, so I can actually see what other people are seeing before it goes out. Every image is going to look a little bit different on every screen, if it's printed, if it's on a computer, if it's on a phone. So I just like to do those final tweaks once I'm on my phone. So I'll go ahead and export these to JPEGs. I tend to do it usually at highest quality, or maybe 90%, and then I'll see you on my phone. All right, so now that I have the images on my phone, I'm going to do my cropping and final edits before I post on Instagram. So I have my photo here, and I'm going to crop it. I always like to do the cropping on my phone if I'm posting to a social media that people are looking at on their phones, because sometimes when I crop on my computer, I think your subject might end up a little bit smaller than maybe you would like it to be. You unfortunately do have to change your composition sometimes on a phone just because of the limited viewing area that people are looking at it. If you're looking at a photo that's all printed out, you could have your subject be maybe 6 inches, but on a phone it might be 1 inch, and you might want to zoom in a little bit more. So let's go ahead and crop this image. I think for this one, I'm going to keep it in landscape. I usually do 5x4, 4x5 for my pictures on Instagram. And again, I'm not going to fiddle around with this forever for the purposes of this video, but I think that's relatively close for a crop that I would do. Now that I have cropped those photos, I don't actually tend to do a lot of editing in the iPhone Photos app. I don't tend to really like the way its adjustments come out. So I actually tend to do my final touches in Instagram itself. This is also good because if you have an Android phone, this will apply to you too. So I typically like to do a carousel with my photos. So let's do these 2 photos, which are pretty similar. And let's do some final edits. Now this is a JPEG image, so you don't want to go crazy with your edits here. You don't want to be making major shadows, highlights, adjustments, white balance, anything like that, because in a JPEG file, you just don't have the latitude to make those sorts of changes. So what I'm really looking to do here is just the final touches, adjust contrast a little bit, maybe slightly adjust color, and just make it look as good on my iPhone screen as I can. So I think I'll add a tiny bit of vignette to this photo. I think maybe I'll try to warm it up just a hair. I will take down, I'll use this Lux tool that Instagram does. It kind of is like clarity / dehaze. Again, don't want to go super crazy with it. And I think that's looking pretty good. Now I am noticing a lot of noise in the background when this is compressed down. You can actually reduce that a bit by cropping your images on the computer and then exporting them at a width of 1080. That is, I think, the optimal width for Instagram, and that will kind of reduce some of that noise. I found that when I rely on Instagram to scale down the images, the noise kind of looks a little hazy and weird and sometimes accentuates it more than it needs to be. I might also go in with a tool like DxO, or Lightroom has some great denoising tools. I get rid of that, but I'm usually not too concerned about it, and for these purposes I won't worry too much about that. But I think I'm happy with the overall look of this. And again, I find that one thing, I did pretty good on this image, but I find a lot of times when I go from the computer to the phone, my images look a lot darker than I was expecting them to. So I'm going to do very similar edits on this one, make it a little warmer, bring in a little bit of vignette, bring up that lux, and I think that is pretty good to go. And that is a basic walkthrough of my editing process. I know this wasn't super in depth of how to use every single tool, but I just wanted to give you an overview of what goes into my images. I do this process for every picture that you see me post online. It's all edited individually in here in Capture One, and then on my phone to Instagram, YouTube, wherever it's going. And that's my entire editing process, start to finish. When you see those photos posted to Instagram, this is what I'm basically doing for all of them. Probably a little bit more in-depth than you saw in this video, but I'm just trying to give you an overview of the workflow and what I'm looking out for when I'm editing images. I would say that white balance is probably the #1 important thing to nail down in your pictures, and then mess with exposure, contrast, maybe some local adjustments if needed, make the subject pop a little bit more, edit the eyes, etc. And then make sure to look at those photos again on the media that you'll be posting to. So if you're posting for TikTok, Instagram, anything that's going to be on a phone, look at them on your phone, make those final adjustments. And also make sure that your photos are cropped appropriately for the medium that they're going on. So if you know everyone's going to be seeing them on Instagram, you might want to make your subject a little bit bigger than if you were printing out a big poster of your photo. And if you liked this video, make sure to hit the like and subscribe buttons. So if there's anything that you want to see from me in the future or any questions that you have, definitely make sure to leave them down below. Till next time, see ya.